Part 1. You are doing the work. You close your eyes, you picture your goal. You try with all your mental might to feel the reality of your wish fulfilled. And yet, a nagging, persistent voice whispers, "Who are you kidding? This isn't real." That feeling of fakeness, of being an imposter in your own dream, is the single greatest obstacle to manifestation. You've been told to ignore it, to push through it. But what if that feeling is not a sign of your weakness, but a critical diagnostic tool? What if it is telling you a profound truth, that you are trying to receive a future reality while still standing firmly in the timeline of your present lack? This story will reveal the secret of timelines. It will explain why your manifestation feels fake, and it will give you the key to shifting your point of perception, allowing you to create not from a distant future, but from an alternate, more powerful, and already existing present. Thomas was a man who understood time, or so he thought. At 39, he was a respected, if not celebrated, historical documentary filmmaker. His life and work were a study in linear progression. He was a master of cause and effect, of assembling the fragmented facts of the past into a coherent, chronological narrative. His apartment, overlooking a quiet, orderly canal in Amsterdam's Jordaan district, was a reflection of his mind, structured, logical, and deeply rooted in the evidence of what has been. His most sacred and all-consuming desire was to create his masterpiece, a film series titled The Soul of the Golden Age. It would not be a typical historical documentary. He dreamed of capturing not the facts and figures of the 17th century Dutch Empire, but its feeling, its consciousness, its energetic signature. It was a project that defied linear storytelling, a dream that felt vast, poetic, and utterly impossible to fund through conventional means. He approached this manifestation with the same discipline he applied to his film editing. He scheduled his visualizations, he scripted his ideal outcomes, he meditated on the feeling of success. But every session was a battle. The feeling of fakeness was a thick, soundproof wall between him and his desire. His mind, the brilliant inner historian that was his greatest professional asset, was also his greatest antagonist. It was a relentless fact-checker. As he tried to feel the joy of securing the funding, his mind would coldly state, "Objection. Your current bank balance is X. The evidence does not support this feeling. This is a lie." He was a man trying to dream, while a ruthless lawyer in his own head was cross-examining the dream for inconsistencies. The more he tried, the more fraudulent he felt, and the more his reality seemed to conspire to prove his inner fraudulence right. Is he trapped in this logical prison, his own brilliant mind, the very thing that is keeping his dream at a perpetual, unreachable distance? Or is there a different understanding of time itself, a secret known to the mystics and the physicists, that could provide the key to his escape? If you have ever felt like you are lying to yourself when you try to manifest, subscribe. This story is about to introduce you to the timeline where your dream is already a fact. Part. The feeling of fakeness had reached a crisis point. The previous loop closed. Thomas's methodology was not just failing, it was actively creating a painful sense of internal dissonance. The new loop opened with the arrival of a final crushing rejection letter from the Netherlands Film Fund, the last bastion of conventional funding. The letter was polite but firm, praising his intellectual rigor, but deeming the project commercially unviable and philosophically abstract. The words were a perfect reflection of his own deepest fears. Defeated, he did something he never did. He abandoned his meticulously planned workday and walked out into the city without a destination. He was a historian without a story, a filmmaker without a future. He let the ancient, winding streets of Amsterdam guide him. He walked for hours, his mind for once too exhausted to analyze, simply observing the beautiful, layered reality of the city, a place where 17th-century gabled houses stood next to sleek, modern design studios. It was in a quiet, forgotten alley in the Denegan Stratias, the 9 Streets district, that he found it. A small shop, almost hidden, its old leaded glass window filled not with products, but with a single magnificent hand-drawn map of the 17th century world. The name on the faded, hand-painted sign read, Elias van der Meer, cartograph and restaurateur van Tide, restorer of time. The phrase struck him as impossibly poetic. He pushed open the heavy oak door. The inside of the shop was a different world. It did not feel like a shop, but like a library of timelines. The air smelled of old parchment, bookbinding glue, and a faint spicy scent of cloves. The walls were covered in maps of every kind, celestial charts, nautical maps, fantastical maps of lands that never existed. In the center of the room, a man in his late 70s, with a fringe of white hair and the focused, patient eyes of a surgeon, was leaning over a massive illuminated table, painstakingly restoring a fragile 16th century map of the city. This was Elias. Thomas stood in the doorway, feeling like a time traveler himself. He was there for a long time before Elias acknowledged him. "You are looking for a map to a place that you cannot find on any of these," the old man said, his voice a quiet, calm rustle like dry parchment. "You are looking for a different kind of future." The perception was so precise, so unnervingly accurate, that Thomas was speechless. He found himself, the master storyteller, stammering as he tried to explain his feeling of being stuck, of the fakeness of his dreams. He spoke of his film, of the rejection, of the feeling of being trapped in a timeline that was not his own. Elias listened, his eyes never leaving the delicate work of his hands. "You see time as a single road, stretching from the past through this one, singular present, and into a distant, uncertain future," he said when Thomas was finished. "You are standing here on this spot on the road, trying to shout at a version of yourself miles ahead. Of course it feels fake. He cannot hear you. He is too far away." He then carefully lifted the corner of the ancient map he was working on, revealing another, fainter map underneath it. But time is not a road. It is a book with 1,000,000 transparent pages, all laid one on top of the other, all existing right now. Your future is not a distant city you must travel to. It is simply a different page in the book. You are already there. Your work is not to travel. Your work is to learn how to turn the page. He then gave Thomas a task. "Go," he said, "walk the city, but stop seeing it as a museum of the past. I want you to find a place, just one, where you can feel 2 pages of the book at the same time. Find a place where the 17th century and the 21st century are not separate, but are touching. That is your first step in learning to turn the page." He has found a mentor who is a master of a different kind of time, a man who sees reality as a book of infinite coexisting pages. But can a historian, a man whose entire profession is dedicated to keeping the pages separate and in order, possibly learn to feel this quantum, layered reality? Part 3. Thomas left the shop with his mind reeling. The metaphor of the Book of Time was beautiful, but his linear, logical mind could not grasp it. This closed the previous loop. He had his mentor and his esoteric mission. The new loop of conflict began the next day as he tried to fulfill the task. He went to the Rijksmuseum, stood before Rembrandt's The Night Watch, and tried to feel the 17th and 21st centuries touching. But he failed. All he felt was himself, a 21st century man, looking at a beautifully preserved artifact from a past that was sealed behind glass, forever separate. His internal conflict was a frustrating battle between his ingrained intellectual habits and this new, intuitive instruction. His antagonist, the inner historian, was in its element. "This is a fool's errand," it argued. "Time is a fixed sequence of events. You are a scholar of history, not a mystic. You are wasting your time on a poetic fantasy while your career withers." He felt foolish. A man wandering the city looking for a feeling that his own mind insisted did not exist. The external conflict arrived in the form of a phone call from a major television production company. They had seen his previous, more conventional work. They were offering him a contract to direct a 6-part series called The Architects of Commerce, a history of the Dutch East India Company. It was a prestigious, well-funded, and completely soulless project. It was a perfect opportunity to continue telling the story of the past in the old linear way. It was a lucrative and respectable cage. "We need a director who can bring the facts to life, Thomas," the producer, a fast-talking woman named Lena, said. "No abstract philosophy, just the solid, chronological story. We need your commitment within the month." He brought his frustration and his conflict to Elias's shop. "I can't do it," he confessed. "I look at the old buildings and I just see old buildings. I see the past. I don't feel the pages touching." Elias was mixing a small pot of ink, a deep, rich sepia. "It is because you are still using your eyes," he said. "Your eyes are trained by your historian's mind. They are excellent at seeing separation. The pages are not felt with the eyes, they are felt with the heart." He then gave Thomas a new, even more perplexing task. "Forget the museums," he said. "Go to the Blumenmarkt, the floating flower market. Buy the bulb of a tulip, a queen of the night. It is a simple, ugly, brown thing. Your task is not to plant it. It is to hold it in your hand and feel the promise of the magnificent, dark, velvet flower that is already sleeping inside it. Do not think about the flower of the future. Feel the flower in the now of the bulb. That is the feeling of two timelines touching." He is being asked to perform an act of pure, intuitive faith, to feel a future that does not yet exist in a present object. This is a direct challenge to his entire evidence-based worldview. Can he possibly access this new way of feeling, or will the hard, tangible reality of the bulb and the lucrative contract on the table prove too powerful for this subtle, unproven philosophy? Part 4. Thomas's world became a strange laboratory of perception. The television contract sat in his email inbox, a ticking clock, a constant and powerful temptation to return to the familiar, linear world. This closed the loop of his initial failure and opened a new, more nuanced loop of practice and pressure. He went to the Blumenmarkt and bought a single, gnarled tulip bulb. This was his new object of study. He would sit in his apartment for an hour each day, holding the dry light bulb in the palm of his hand, and he would try to feel the flower. It was a maddening and seemingly fruitless practice. His inner historian was merciless. "You are holding a dormant plant rhizome," it would state matter-of-factly. "Its future bloom is a biological potential, not a present reality. You are projecting a feeling onto an inert object. This is a delusion." The main subtrauma of his life became his weekly phone call with his sister Maria, a pragmatic and loving classical musician in Utrecht. She was his anchor to the real world. He tried to explain his new practice to her. "So, you're holding a bulb?" she asked, her voice a mixture of deep concern and gentle confusion. "Thomas, I think you need a real project. That TV series sounds perfect. It's stable. It's respectable. Maybe you should just take it. You can work on your soul film on the weekends." Her loving, logical advice was a powerful voice for his own deepest doubts. But in the quiet of his practice, something began to shift. He started to notice things he hadn't before. He began to see the city not as a collection of separate objects, but as a series of nested timelines. He would see a 17th-century canal house with a sleek, minimalist tech startup operating on the ground floor. He would see a young student on a futuristic electric scooter listening to Bach on their headphones. He started to feel it, just for a fleeting second here and there, the feeling of the pages touching. He realized he was surrounded by living palimpsests. The most powerful moment came not from the bulb, but from a piece of music. His sister sent him a recording of her string quartet playing a piece by Arvo Pärt, the Estonian composer. The music was profoundly minimalist, with long, resonant silences between the notes. As he listened, he realized that the silence was not empty space. The silence was where the memory of the previous note and the anticipation of the next one met. The past and the future were both present in the stillness of the now. He was finally, truly feeling it. The timelines were not separate. They were all held together in the vibrating, resonant field of the present. He has had his first real, experiential breakthrough. He has felt the touching of the pages. But he is still a man with bills to pay and a major career decision to make. How can this subtle, musical, and deeply personal experience possibly compete with the hard, logical, and very lucrative reality of the television contract? Part 5. The day before he had to give his final answer to Lena, the television producer, Thomas was in a state of profound but quiet conflict. He had experienced the touching of the timelines, but it was a fleeting, ephemeral feeling. The contract on his desk was a hard, tangible reality. He went to Elias's shop not for an answer, but for a sanctuary. The loop of his abstract breakthrough was about to be grounded in a powerful, undeniable experience. Elias was not at his workbench. He was standing by a large, flat drawer, and he beckoned Thomas over. He slid open the drawer. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, was a palimpsest. It was a 13th century religious text, but visible beneath the Latin script like a ghost was the fainter, more elegant script of a 10th century Arabic text on astronomy. "Look," Elias said, his voice a reverent whisper. "Two worlds, two timelines, two different ways of seeing the stars, both here, right now, on the same page." He then looked at Thomas, his eyes full of a deep, kind wisdom. "Your problem, Thomas," he said, "is that you have been trying to make the new writing match the old. You have been trying to create a feeling of success while living on the page of 'I am a struggling filmmaker.' The old writing is still dominant. Of course it feels fake. The two are in conflict." He then delivered the heart of the real method. "You do not create a new future," he said, pointing to the palimpsest. "You simply choose which writing on the page you will make dominant. You choose which timeline you will inhabit. And you do this by giving it all of your attention, all of your feeling, all of your belief. You must stop trying to visit the new timeline and decide to live there. You must act, speak, and feel from that reality, not towards it. The fake feeling is simply the ghost of the old timeline, trying to convince you that it is the only one that is real." In that moment, everything clicked. The flower in the bulb, the past and future in the silence of the music, and now this. A quote from Neville Goddard, which had once seemed like mystical nonsense, became a clear, practical instruction. An assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. His job was not to manifest, it was to assume. He left the shop, his heart calm and his mind clear. He went home, sat at his desk, and he made a decision. He was no longer a struggling filmmaker trying to get funding. He was, as of that moment, a successful funded filmmaker who was in the pre-production phase of his masterpiece. He was turning the page. He has the method. He has made the decision. He has chosen his new timeline. But this is an internal, invisible act. What will be the first tangible, real-world consequence of this profound shift in his state of being? How will the world respond to a man who is now living from a future that has not yet technically happened? This profound reframing of time and creation has opened a new door in your own mind. Subscribe for more stories that provide the keys to new realities. Part 6. The decision to inhabit his new timeline was the most significant act of Thomas's life. The previous loop closed. He had the method. Now he had to live the consequences of its application. His first act from this new state of being was to email Lena, the television producer. The old Thomas would have written a long, apologetic email, hedging his bets. The new Thomas, the successful filmmaker, wrote a short, polite, and decisive note. "Thank you for the wonderful opportunity," it read. "However, my schedule is now fully committed to my own project. I wish you the best of luck." He did not feel fear. He felt the calm, decisive clarity of a man whose time was already accounted for. The consequences of this choice were immediate and profound. He was now completely without income or professional prospects. His savings would last him 6 months at best. The inner historian, the ghost of his old timeline, screamed in terror. "You have just committed career suicide based on a conversation with an old map maker." But Thomas had a new tool. He would feel the fear, acknowledge it as the fading echo of an old reality, and then he would consciously, deliberately return his attention to his new timeline. His actions began to change. He stopped working on grant proposals. Instead, he started the actual work of creating his film. He rented professional camera equipment using a significant portion of his savings, an act that would have been unthinkable on his old timeline. He began shooting test footage in the Rijksmuseum, in the quiet streets of Delft, in the tulip fields outside the city. He was not creating a pitch. He was creating his film. He hired his sister Maria's string quartet to compose and record preliminary sketches of the film's score. He was acting from the reality of a fully funded project. His sister thought he had lost his mind. "Thomas, what are you doing?" she pleaded with him during one phone call. "You are spending all your money. You don't have a contract." "The contract is a formality," he replied, with a calm certainty that she found deeply unnerving. "It's a trailing indicator. The decision has already been made." He was speaking a language she didn't understand, the language of his new page in the book of time. He's taking massive, inspired, and seemingly reckless action. He's burning his bridges to his old reality. He's living fully in his new assumption. But the material world has yet to catch up. How long can he sustain this state of being before his savings run out and his chosen timeline collides with the hard facts of his bank account? Part 7. The next 3 months were a masterclass in faith. Thomas lived every day as the successful director of the soul of the Golden Age. His small apartment was transformed from a historian's library into a vibrant, chaotic pre-production studio. Storyboards covered the walls. Soundscapes for the film played on a constant loop. He was a man completely and utterly possessed by his creation. This was his final, most difficult test. The real world kept sending him reflections from his old timeline. His bank account dwindled. His landlord sent a notice about a rent increase. His inner historian whispered its constant, insidious doubts. This was the dark night of the soul for his new belief system. The temptation to panic, to give up, to admit that this was all a grand delusion was immense. He consolidated his growth by using his own creative work as his anchor. Whenever the fear would rise, he would not fight it. He would go back to his editing suite and immerse himself in the beautiful, soulful footage he was creating. He would listen to the soaring, heart-breaking music his sister's quartet had recorded. He was surrounding himself with the physical, tangible evidence of his new timeline. He was making his chosen reality more real, more vibrant, and more compelling than the reality of his dwindling bank account. He had one final, powerful breakthrough. He was editing a sequence about the tulip mania, and he realized that the entire phenomenon was a perfect metaphor for his own journey. The investors were not buying a flower. They were buying into a shared, collective future reality. For a brief, magical period, they had, as a group, turned the page to a timeline where a single tulip bulb was worth more than a house. The bubble burst, not because the tulips weren't beautiful, but because their collective belief wavered. They fell back to the old page in the book. He understood on a visceral level that his only job was to hold his belief, his state of being, with an unwavering, joyful and stubborn conviction. He has survived the darkest hour. He has made his chosen reality more real than his present circumstances. He has become a living, breathing embodiment of his film. He has tended to his anchor, but an anchor is meant to hold a ship. Where is the ship? Where is the tangible, real-world manifestation that will finally make his new timeline the dominant consensus reality? Part 8. The ship appeared in the most unexpected of harbors. Thomas had edited a short, 5-minute proof of concept for his film. It was not a trailer. It was not a pitch. It was a poem. A beautiful, immersive, and deeply moving evocation of the feeling he was trying to capture. He had created it not to show to investors, but for himself, as a way to clarify his own vision. The loop of his solitary creation was closed. The final loop, the one leading to the climax, opened with a small, seemingly insignificant act of synchronicity. His sister, Maria, called him. "Thomas," she said, her voice full of excitement. "You know my cellist, Anya? Her father is a retired art historian who is on the board of a very strange, very private foundation, the Veritas Foundation. They fund unfundable projects, things that fall between the cracks of art and history. He's in town for one night. I showed him your 5-minute film. He was speechless. He wants to meet you tonight." The meeting was not in a boardroom. It was at a small, old Bruin cafe, brown cafe, in the Jordan, the kind of place that was a living museum of Amsterdam's soul. The man, a distinguished white-haired gentleman named Mr. de Vries, looked at Thomas with sharp, intelligent eyes. He was a gatekeeper, but a different kind. "Your sister showed me your film," Mr. de Vries began, testing the word. "It is not a documentary. It is a séance. You have managed to channel the ghost of the 17th century. The old Thomas would have launched into a detailed, logical explanation of his historical methodology. The new Thomas simply smiled. "I am simply showing what is already there," he said. "On a different page." Mr. de Vries raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "The Veritas Foundation has an annual Patron's Prize," he explained. "We don't accept applications. We find our recipients. We are looking for one project a year that is not just preserving the past, but is creating a new future for how we perceive it. We are meeting tomorrow to make our final decision. Tell me, young man, why should it be you?" The final gatekeeper has appeared. The question has been asked. This is not a test of his data, but a test of his being. Can he transmit the truth of his new timeline to this man, the one person who has the power to make it a consensus reality? Part 9. Thomas looked at Mr. de Vries, the old historian, the guardian of the past. He saw not a judge, but a fellow time traveler. He took a deep breath and anchored himself in the reality he had been cultivating for months. He was not a filmmaker asking for money. He was a successful filmmaker discussing his completed work. "It should be me," Thomas began, his voice calm, confident, and completely free of the needy energy of a supplicant, "because I am the only one who can make this film. Not because I am the best historian, but because I have learned to see time differently. The soul of the Golden Age is not a story about what happened then. It is a story about what is still happening now, on a different frequency, on a different page. This film is not an excavation of the past. It is an act of remembering a part of ourselves that we have forgotten. It is not a history lesson. It is a mirror." He spoke for 10 minutes, but he was not pitching. He was transmitting. He was speaking from the timeline where the film was already a celebrated masterpiece. He was radiating the frequency of the wish fulfilled. He was not trying to convince Mr. de Vries of a future possibility. He was inviting him into a present reality. Mr. de Vries was completely still, his eyes locked on Thomas. He had spent his life in the world of facts, of evidence, of linear history. But he was also a man who loved art, who understood the power of a story to transcend time. He was feeling the truth of Thomas's state of being. He was feeling the resonance of the new timeline. When Thomas finished, the old historian was silent for a long time. He took a slow sip of his Geneva. "When I was a young man," he said finally, his voice a low, nostalgic rumble. "I wanted to be a poet, but I chose to be a historian. I chose the facts over the feeling." He looked at Thomas, and his eyes were shining with a profound and long-forgotten light. "It seems you have found a way to do both." He stood up and placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "I cannot make any promises. The board will decide. But tonight, you have made an old man remember what it feels like to be on a different page." The next afternoon, Thomas received a phone call. It was Mr. de Vries. "The Veritas Foundation," he said, and Thomas could hear the smile in his voice, "would be honored to provide the full and complete funding for the soul of the Golden Age." The promise of the introduction was fulfilled. The feeling was fake because he was on the wrong timeline. The moment he truly changed the page, the feeling became a fact, and the world rearranged itself around that fact with breathtaking speed and grace. The dream is manifest. The funding is secured. He has won not by fighting but by shifting his state of being. But what happens when a man who has learned to travel through time finally has to make his masterpiece in the linear, day-to-day world? Part 10. The Soul of the Golden Age took 2 years to make, and it was a work of pure joy. Thomas built his production company on the principles he had learned. His film set was a place of calm, creative flow, a space where everyone was invited to operate from a place of inspired presence rather than frantic pressure. He had not just manifested a film, he had manifested a new way of creating. The film, when it was released, was a global phenomenon. It didn't just win awards, it changed the way historical documentaries were made. It was praised for its visual beauty, its historical depth, and its profound, unquantifiable ability to make the viewer feel the past as a living, breathing presence. It was a film that turned the page for everyone who watched it. Thomas's life was transformed. He was now a celebrated, sought-after filmmaker, but the success did not change the core of his new being. He lived a quiet, beautiful life in Amsterdam, finding his greatest joy not on the red carpet, but in the simple, present-moment reality of a walk along the canal, a conversation with his sister, or a visit to Elias's timeless shop. He had learned the ultimate secret. The feeling of fakeness is the most valuable and precious signal the universe can give us. It is a compassionate alarm bell, telling us that we are trying to create a new reality while still standing in the energetic signature of the old one. The work is not to push past the feeling, but to heed its message. The work is to change our state of being first. The work is to turn the page. Once we do that, the feeling is no longer fake. It becomes the new, solid ground of fact upon which we stand. We see Thomas a year later in Elias's shop. He is not there as a student. He is at the old illuminated table, working alongside the master. He is using his filmmaker's eye and his historian's knowledge to help the old man create a new kind of map, a digital, interactive map of time for the city of Amsterdam, an app that will allow users to see and feel the different historical pages of the city as they walk through it. He is not just telling the stories of the past, he is making them a living, breathing part of the present. He learned that the future is not a destination to be reached, but a page to be turned. What page of your own great book is waiting for you to simply decide to live from it? That feeling of fakeness during manifestation is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that your state of being has not yet caught up with your desire. It is a call to change your inner timeline first. Your challenge is this: choose one of your desires. For just 5 minutes a day, for 1 week, your task is not to visualize it or affirm it. Your task is to close your eyes and ask one simple question. What does the version of me who already has this feel like right now? Don't try to invent the feeling. Just listen for it, inhabit it, walk as them, breathe as them. This is the first step to turning the page. What did you discover? Share the feeling of your new timeline self in the comments below. For more stories that will help you master the subtle art of quantum creation and navigate the timelines of your own beautiful reality, make sure you subscribe and join this community of time travelers.